The Lager Beer Riot arguably is the most important political moment in Chicago's history because it's a moment when Chicago politics becomes what it is famous for, which is ethnic urban machine politics.
Chicago has always been a tumultuous city. In 1855, Irish and German immigrants of Chicago reacted against dry practices enforced by Mayor Levi Boone and the Know-Nothing Party, such as blue laws and increased licensing fees, by revolting with the Lager Beer Riot. The riot restored the original licensing fee, ended nonpartisanship elections, and reformed Chicago politics forever. In the mid-1800s, the flow of German and Irish immigration to Chicago increased substantially due to the potato famine in Ireland and political oppression in Germany. Between 1848 and 1860, nearly 3.5 million immigrants entered the United States, proportionately the heaviest inflow of foreigners ever in American history. Like most immigrants, both groups came here in hopes of creating a better life for themselves and their families. Instead, they were met with heavy discrimination and were considered to be un-American.
The population of Chicago in this time was fundamentally divided in two ways. First was what they would then have called Native American stock, meaning white people born in the United States, not Native American the way we would mean it today, against immigrant groups, primarily German and Irish, mostly Roman Catholic. So the Protestant versus Catholic divide and the native versus immigrant divide were really important. And the Know-Nothings were a nationwide phenomenon, and they were basically, again, white people born in America who believed that immigrants could not really be American, especially Catholic immigrants, because being an American meant giving up all loyalty to your...
For Germans, their culture was heavily focused on beer drinking. Germans who came to Chicago in the 1850s brought their old traditions with them, mainly the enjoyment of lager beer. It wasn't just an activity for adult men. People brought their children to saloons for leisure time. In 1855, the Know-Nothings were swept into office in Chicago due to the lack of interest in municipal elections. The Know-Nothings, named this way because its first members kept their purposes a secret, saying, "I know nothing," to all questions, were in favor of civic order and traditional American values, while being vehemently anti-foreigner, anti-Catholic, and anti-alcohol. In 1854, anti-immigrant fears gave the Know-Nothing Party spectacular success in the North. They strove to reinforce Protestant morality and to restrict voting and office holding to the native-born. Levi Boone, the leader of the party and the newly elected mayor of Chicago, had a distinct dislike for the uniquely German and Irish neighborhoods of Chicago. He did not accept their independent communities that were all German and all Irish. He also saw beer drinking as uniquely German and un-American, and sought to harm both the German and Irish groups by limiting their consumption of alcohol. In his inaugural speech, Boone states, "I would therefore recommend the council to refuse the sale of intoxicating liquors. I am aware that in urging you, gentlemen, not to grant licenses, I am advocating a policy which would deprive me of some $500 fees to which I would be entitled if the practice of licensing should be continued. But I can only say that it seems to me if the hundreds were multiplied into thousands, it could not change my views or influence my actions." Mayor Boone reformed the police force, tripling its size, refusing to hire immigrants, and directing them to enforce the old, previously ignored ordinance requiring the Sunday closing of taverns and saloons. The law was intended to eliminate the possibility for Germans and Irish to spend their leisure hours in drinking establishments. Mayor Boone also increased the liquor license fee from $50 a year to $300. The German and Irish of Chicago took this as a personal attack because they were the main owners and occupiers of saloons. They believed that these attacks were directed against their establishments and not the American-owned ones, because while Irish and German saloon owners were getting arrested constantly for operating on Sundays, American-owned saloons were still able to operate through back doors on Sundays. This showed the Irish and German immigrants that this crackdown was not necessarily an attack on alcohol, but an attack on their culture and traditions.
The city was growing because of these immigrants, both from Kentucky and New York and New England, other parts of the U.S., and other parts of the world. So there wasn't like a Chicago that they all came to. Their coming here is what made Chicago.
On the first Sunday of enforcement of the Blue Laws, over 200 German and Irish saloon keepers were arrested. Their court date was originally set for April 20th, 1855. In order to thwart the rallying immigrants, they changed the court date last minute to April 21st. The immigrants got word of this, and multitudes gathered outside the former Cook County Courthouse on the corner of Clark and Adams to protest the arrest and enforcement of the new laws. None were armed. None of the protesters came looking for a fight, but Levi Boone and his new immigrant-free police force didn't respect the immigrants' right to assemble. Boone ordered the police to clear the area immediately. In the process, 9 protesters were arrested. Angered by Boone's actions, 600 furious German and Irish immigrants stormed across the Clark Street Bridge, this time armed and ready to retaliate. To stop them from getting across and to give them a chance to assemble a sufficient police force, Boone ordered for the bridge to be lifted. Once the bridge was lowered, a cry of "Pick out the stars!" was heard and the first shots were fired. Police officer Patrick Hunt was shot in the arm, and as the shooter attempted to flee, he was shot, providing a wound that ended his life. The crowd was dispersed in minutes after its start, but its effects were felt long after the riot. Shortly after the riot, the original $50 liquor license fee was restored and the Blue Laws were temporarily repealed. Taverns and saloons were able to remain meeting places for the foreign and native-born Chicago citizens alike. In the next election, Levi Boone was ousted, ending know-nothing control in Chicago. In the long run, the real effects were seen in the reform of Chicago municipal politics.
Before the Lager Beer Riot, nobody much bothered with municipal politics. After the Lager Beer Riot, municipal politics becomes the central thing in Chicago, and still is to this day. So arguably, everything else that came after flowed from this first moment. So you could call it the beginning of Chicago politics as urban ethnic politics.
Shortly after the riot, the original $50 liquor license fee was restored and the Blue Laws were temporarily repealed. Taverns and saloons were able to remain meeting places for the foreign and native-born Chicago citizens alike. In the long run, the real effects were seen in the reform of Chicago municipal politics. Renewed attention to city elections on the part of political party leaders ended the era of municipal nonpartisanship, making Chicago one of the most political cities in the country. Never again would city elections be of such limited interest that a small group of extremists could win so easily. Also, after the riot, the immigrants realized that they could have an effect on elections since they made up 60% of the city's population, outnumbering the American-born citizens. In the next election, the immigrants mobilized and used their vote to oust Levi Boone, kicking the know-nothings out of office and restoring the $50 liquor license fee. The mayor they elected, Thomas Dyer, said in his inaugural speech, "One great source of annoyance and vexation to our citizens has been the uncertain policy with respect to rates of license. While I intend to recall none of the evils of the past, I think we can remember them with profit. I am in favor of the establishment of a good and effective ordinance respecting the sale of liquor. In framing it, I would so provide that while excesses should be prevented on one hand, there should be no prosecution or prohibition on the other." Not only could they now influence the political process, but also express their culture more freely. The Lager Beer Riot of 1855 had forcefully demonstrated that the German and Irish communities in Chicago truly believed that drinking wasn't a crime against morality, but an act of cultural expression and leisure. They would no longer allow government to infringe on their personal liberties. The riot also led to the rise of a new political party. Having experienced the disastrous consequences of Levi Boone's election in 1855 and the riotous results of their earlier political naivete, a coalition of brewers, distillers, and saloon keepers organized the People's Party. The People's Party was able to elect Mayor Harvey Doodle Colvin in 1873, showing the growing power of immigrants in Chicago. The riot was ultimately a success, booting the know-nothings out of power, mobilizing Chicago immigrant voters, and bringing citywide attention to municipal elections. If one was to ask about the Chicago Lager Beer Riot, there wouldn't be many people who could truly say that they had ever even heard about it. However, this event changed Chicago politics from being near ignored to being significantly influential throughout the country. In contrast to 157 years ago, the Irish and German cultures are widely accepted now, as seen by events like Oktoberfest and touring Celtic dance groups. The Riot restored the original licensing fee, ended nonpartisanship elections, and reformed Chicago politics forever.